Wonderful people, I am so glad to greet you in this space. My name is Reverend Cari Jackson. I am one of the co-executives with Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice in Washington, D.C. We have the incredible privilege this evening of partnering with Colorado RCRC and with ILIF School of Theology, and we're so delighted to be in this space. And I want to introduce to you first Reverend Dr. Christina, and I don't have your name up here and I'm going to say it wrong, so I apologize. Reverend Dr. Christina Lizardi Hajibi. I still said it wrong. When you get my age, you need to read. I don't know why I didn't bring my paper up here. But Christina is going to come, and immediately following her will be Dr. Joyce Lisbon. My apologies.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to ILIF School of Theology. As Cari said, my name is Christina Lizardi Hajbi, and I serve as ILIF's Assistant Professor of Leadership and Formation, and also as the Director of the Office of Professional Formation here at ILIF, which is a co-sponsor of this event tonight. We here at ILIF, the administration, the faculty, the staff, and the students are particularly proud to host this event this evening. In our own words, women, religion, and choice is not only an invitation to learning and to dialogue, it is an occasion to center the voices and experiences of women around a topic that is in deep need of theological reflection, scholarship, and action. As an institution that not only has strong roots in critical scholarship and activism, the ILIF School of Theology continues to nurture those roots by educating leaders with courageous theological imagination, not only in mind, but in body, spirit, and emotion. In our mission statement, we are clear about the commitments to social justice, inclusiveness, and religious diversity. Our ultimate vision at ILIF is to transform the world by creating new and renewed local and global communities of inclusive justice, first by generating critical scholarship and also engaging what is sacred. So tonight, by listening to wisdom from two very accomplished scholars, dialoguing with one another with respect and kindness, and being open to new narratives of possibility, we together here tonight embody that mission and vision. Through our partnership with the National and Colorado RCRC to lift up this critical scholarship, we honor our commitments to engaging faithfully what is sacred. So thank you. Thank you for your presence this evening, and welcome again to ILIF School of Theology.
Hi, I'm Joyce Lisbon. I'm the exec of the local affiliate, and I welcome you. I am so happy to see all of you here tonight, and thanks to our distinguished authors, this promises to be a very special evening, and we are very pleased and proud to be part of it. Let me tell you a little bit about CORCRC. We are an organization of people from many different faiths and of no particular faith. We are all advocates for reproductive rights and access. We work hard to keep our supporters informed about related policies and legislation, and we often testify in front of the legislature to remind our elected officials that there are many people of faith who trust women and support their decisions about their own bodies. We provide a free, non-judgmental, all options counseling. The caller who calls us is connected to a clergy person that reflects their faith so that they can discuss their concerns regarding pregnancy options with a compassionate clergy person. We organize educational programs such as this and develop educational tools that encourage clergy, congregations, individuals, and small groups to talk about reproductive health, the separation of church and state, equity, and many other related issues to women's autonomy. Rarely are we given the opportunity to talk about our beliefs, our feelings, and reproductive experiences. Yet, I bet that most of the women in this room can remember when they got their period, and they can remember the first time they had to go to the store and buy their feminine hygiene products. Safe to say that many of us have had sex and likely relied on contraception most of the time. And because we are women, if we had sex, many of us have experienced pregnancies, miscarriages, giving birth, and abortion. All of these common experiences, especially abortion, are wrapped in layers of ethical, cultural, and religious values. We believe that discussion of these issues need to take place in safe and compassionate environments. So with the expertise of an organization that we work closely with called Progress Now, we are able to share with you 5 short videos. We're only going to show one tonight, don't panic. That are to be used as a catalyst for reflecting and discussing your beliefs, decisions, and attitudes about health, reproduction, and destiny. 4 clergy have shared their personal faith-based beliefs about abortion and a woman's right to exercise her own conscience in decision-making. There are individual videos by Rabbi Becker, Reverend Val Jackson, who is a Methodist, Pastor Stephen Papa, who is a UU minister, and Sister Evangeline, who is from Colorado Springs. The 5 are in a montage of, the 5th video rather, is a montage that we were going to share with you tonight. And so I hope that that's ready, okay?
For me, it was fulfilling a childhood dream. When I wrote my essay for rabbinical school, I said, I've been wandering for 40 years. It's time to enter the land.
Once I understood that I was sensing or discerning God's call to me, I took off like a bolt of lightning.
I made my first communion when I was 7 years old. And to this day, I think I saw a vision of Jesus inviting me. And I thought, well, that's my call.
Part of what's made this so special and work so well as a country is that we haven't let one religion control everyone else. Your religion says it's conception, fine. You don't need to get an abortion. That's your choice. Something. But if your religion says it's 9 months when they take the first breath, then it should be up to your conscience.
Seminary woke me up. And I actually found myself in a situation where I had to decide for my own personal life. It is my right to choose. Let me decide what is best for me given my circumstances at the time.
I stand for women. I believe women ought to have a choice, and that choice ought to be respected, although I do not believe in abortion. Whatever you do, it's your choice in the final analysis. And it's your conscience that guides you to make that choice.
Judaism said women have choices. People have choices. With freedom comes the responsibility to choose. And when you choose, you have to choose to make the world better.
So each of those wonderful people have a short video dedicated to their beliefs and statements. So I hope that you will take advantage of these videos. We will be available if you want to schedule a program around these, but they're also perfect for those of you who don't like discussing these things in small groups, to look at them, reflect, and just talk to yourself about all these very complicated issues, and we are here to support you through that process. So if you want to, you can let us know. Just email us and we'll help set up a program or just talk with you, okay? And thank you and enjoy the rest of the evening.
So it is my great pleasure to introduce one of our two guest authors this evening, Dr. Monique Moultrie is author of Passionate and Pious, Religious Media and Black Women's Sexuality, and assistant professor of religious studies at Georgia State University. Dr. Moultrie's scholarly pursuits include projects in sexual ethics, African American religions, and gender and sexuality studies. Some of her recent publications include a co-edited volume, A Guide for Women in Religion, Making Your Way from A to Z, second edition, an article, Putting a Ring on It, Black Women, Black Churches, and Coerced Monogamy in the Black Theology Journal, a book chapter, Black Female Sexual Agency and Racialized Holy Sex in Black Christian Reality TV Shows, edited by Mara Einstein, Catherine Madden, and Diane Winston. An article, hashtag Black Babies Matter, analyzing Black religious media in conservative and progressive evangelical communities in the Religions Journal, and an article, After the Thrill is Gone, Married to the Holy Spirit but Still Sleeping Alone, in Pneuma, the Journal of the Society for Pentecostal Studies. Her forthcoming research is a book-length study of Black lesbian religious leadership and faith activism. Within the American Academy of Religion Guild, which meets this weekend, Dr. Moultrie is chair of the Status of Women in the Profession Unit and former co-chair of the Religion and Sexuality Unit. Please help me welcome Dr. Monique Moultrie. And now I'd like to welcome Camilla Raymond, who serves as the Contextual Education Coordinator in our Office of Professional Formation, to introduce our other author this evening. And Camilla has spent a lot of time and effort coordinating this event this evening, along with the Colorado and National RCRC planning team. So, Camilla.
Thank you. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Reverend Dr. Rebecca Todd Peters is author of Trust Women, a progressive argument for reproductive justice. She's also professor of religious studies and director of the Poverty and Social Justice Program at Elon University. So we've traveled, both of our panelists, and we thank you for coming here. We know you've come from afar. Her work as a feminist social ethicist is focused on globalization, economic, environmental, and reproductive justice. Her first book, In Search of the Good Life, The Ethics of Globalization, won the 2003 Trinity Book Prize, and her second monograph, Solidarity Ethics, Transformation in a Globalized World, was published in January 2014 by Fortress Press. She has published 22 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters, and co-edited 5 books, including Justice in a Global Economy, Strategies for Home, Community, and the World. In addition to Do Justice, a Guide for Progressive Christians. Her upcoming co-edited book, Encountering the Sacred, Feminist Reflections on Women's Lives, is soon scheduled for release. She was past president of the American Association, the AAR, the American, we always use acronyms, the American Academy of Religion, which is meeting this weekend, the Southeast region, that is. She's ordained in the Presbyterian USA denomination. She's been active denominationally and ecumenically for over 25 years and currently represents the PCUSA as member of the Faith and Order Standing Commission of the World Church Council of Churches. She served as co-moderator of the Faith and Order Study on Moral Discernment in the Churches. And I'd like for all of us to welcome her. Thank you so much for coming.
I have my paper now, so I can read properly and say names. Oh my. Amen.
Are you showing a video? No, not me.
I am so delighted to be here with these 2 amazing scholars, not only because they are scholars, but because they really love God and love God's people. And it is because of their love that they engage in the kind of critique that they engage in to help us really be more of what we're invited to be as people of faith. And so my role this evening is to ask them some questions and they will respond to those questions. The first question, and I'm going to ask Monique to start and then we'll come to Todd. What personal experience or observations in your life prompted you to write your book? And what impact do you hope your book will have?
Sure. So I figured we'd do the shorter part here. So I start the book with the story of my 16-year-old self trying to make sense of a public shaming that happened in my church. 2 of my church friends, my best friends, were pregnant. No one knew. They weren't visibly pregnant. They hadn't discussed it with our friend group. And on this particular Sunday, the pastor brought both of them out of the choir stand and said they needed to repent before the church. And I didn't know for what. And that was sort of kept hush-hush until they made their own declaration. And I was baffled as the church then took a motion to strip these young girls of their responsibilities until after the babies were born. So they could no longer sing in the choir, they could no longer usher. They were removed from the Vacation Bible School arts and craft team. And I could not wrap my brain around what had occurred, specifically because the male fathers sat in the pew and nothing happened to them. So the book really started that day with me asking my mother questions about what just happened and what we could do differently for the next generation. I learned that day that often churches are willing to pay attention to sexuality as long as it impugns women's sexual rights, sexual control, sexual agency. Before I learned what womanism, sexism, patriarchy meant, I learned that the God of my tradition did not expect men to be or to accept responsibility for their sexual conduct or their sexual sin. On that Sunday, my decision to be a questioning Christian was bolstered. And that's where the book sort of starts. So what I wanted the book to accomplish is, given the fact that Black women in particular are given a variety of messages about their sexuality, my book sought to explore how and where and why women make sexual decisions, whether viewed as hypersexual, and in need of restraint, or asexual and too holy for sex. There are plentiful conversations about sexuality that have nothing to do with Black women telling their own story. So that's the first goal of the book, to offer space, to foreground the sexual decision-making of Black Christian women. Secondly, the second and third goals were to introduce faith-based sexuality ministries and to explore sexual pleasure and Christian women. The book is, in fact, my realized dream, to have a conversation on faith and sexuality in Black religious spaces. But just like this event, I hope that it crosses over to have appeal with women in other communities to talk about their sexual agency and faith.
Do you have my PowerPoint? Okay, super. Okay, thanks. Thank you, Cari, and all of you who have welcomed us here today. This is really an honor and a joy to be here and have this conversation. So I thank you for that. In some ways, I didn't start quite as young thinking about this book as Monique did, but a lot of my adult life from college on has been oriented around thinking about questions of reproductive health and reproductive rights. I remember talking about these issues with my parents on a break from college at one point, and we were talking about abortion. And, I said that thing that I have heard lots and lots of Christian women say, which is, well, I support abortion, but I would never have one. And my mom said, well, I wouldn't want you to have a baby if you didn't want to be a mother, and she totally reframed it and reframed for me different ways of thinking about pregnancy, right? And abortion, that the idea of having a baby is a much more important and significant moral decision than ending a pregnancy, because the commitment that you're making is a lifelong commitment to raising a child. And so that really reframed for me in a very early age how I thought about this issue. I was a clinic escort, and I studied at Union Theological Seminary with Beverly Harrison, who wrote in 1983 Our Right to Choose, which has been, sort of one of the major books in the field from a pro-choice Christian perspective. And so I've been doing work on the issue for a number of years, and for years and years and years, people kept saying, you should write a book on this, you should write a book on this. And I kept saying, but I don't know what I would write, I don't know what I would say. And it was also a timing issue. I had young children. I had some trepidation about writing a book about abortion when I had very young children who couldn't understand if there were to be backlash, if people were to say bad things about their mother that they didn't understand. And so some of it was really thinking through and making decisions about when would be a right time for me as a mother and a scholar to tackle this issue. And then came the 2010 elections. And there was a wave across the country with the Tea Party where state house after state house went Republican. And then right after that, starting in 2011, we began to have just this cascade of state restrictions around abortion. And that was really the pivotal moment for me as I began to think about Bev's work and what she had written and what Christian ethicists hadn't yet said and weren't saying. And no one in my guild, no Christian ethicist had written anything since 1983. And so while many of the arguments that she made in 83 are still very important and still stand, a lot has changed since 1983. And there was a lot that needs to be said. And so that was really the pivotal moment for me in thinking about moving this to the forefront of my own work and agenda. And I had a sabbatical a couple of years ago, and when I started the sabbatical, I had no idea what I was going to say. I just knew something needed to be said. So I spent a lot of time talking with people, talking with pastors, talking with friends, saying, what questions do you have? What are you struggling with? What are you hearing from people in your pews? And what are the concerns that you have around this? And a lot of that really helped to frame how I was thinking about it and what I wanted to say. And so I have two hopes for the book, and I'll get into this a little bit more later, but my hopes are that I think we need to shift the way we talk about abortion in this country. And my hope is that my book can be part of helping us think through how to make that shift and what a new conversation about abortion might look like. So that's really, really my primary hope. But I also, my secondary hope is really about you all and about all of us. And that is that we, people of faith who want to uphold the possibility of abortion as a legal option for women, will begin to speak out more and have better ways of talking about why we believe what we believe as people of faith. Because I think that the religious right has really co-opted and controlled the conversation around abortion and religious perspectives and belief. And I know, scores of people of faith who are pro-choice, but who also don't feel like they have spaces or places to talk about it. And I think we all need to work together to figure out how to do that and where to do that and effective ways to do that. So those are my two hopes.
Thank you both. So my second question, what are the key points raised in your book? And you've said a little of that already. But what's distinctive from what's in other books? And what do you regard as significant about these points in the current political and social moment that we find ourselves? Todd.
All right, thanks. Okay, so they kindly brought me this stool, and I'm a little worried that I might fall off it. So I may stand here for a few minutes, and then I might get down and wander around. But I'll start up here. All right, so I have three key contributions that I want to talk us through. And so those three are that I name and critique what I call the justification framework. And so I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about that. The second is that I offer reproductive justice as an alternative framework, because my main argument is we need to shift the discourse. We need to shift the narrative in this country. And third, I propose a Christian counter narrative of abortion, because again, I think people that I talk to, people that I know, are struggling with how to have a positive frame to talk about this. A lot of times it just gets framed as tragedy. And there are absolutely cases where women are making decisions that are tragic. But that's not all women, and that's not all women's experiences. And so I want to help us have more ways of talking about abortion and the experience of abortion. So despite the fact that abortion is legal in this country, we still require women to justify their abortions. How do we know this? Well, it's interesting. So, okay, I'm gonna get off here so I can talk to you. Okay, so you're probably familiar with graphs like this, right? Only 18% of people think that abortion should be illegal in all circumstances. 29% think it should be legal in all circumstances. But half of the country thinks that, I should probably grab this, they told me to take away. Half of the country thinks that there are certain circumstances under which abortion should be legal, right? So when it says certain circumstances, that is code, right? What is that code for? I call them the prim reasons for abortion: prenatal health, rape, incest, and mother's life and health. These are really the certain circumstances that people are referring to when they are willing to say that abortion should be legal. And we know this again through approval ratings from polling data. For decades, there has been very, very strong support for all four of these categories, with obviously mother's life being the strongest. But then if we compare those reasons for abortion with the incidence of abortion, what we find is that it's really only about a quarter of abortions fall into those prim categories. So almost 3/4 of the people, the women in the country who are having abortions, are having ordinary abortions. And so that means 3/4 of the women who are having abortions are falling into that category of we don't think your abortion is okay, right? So majority of Americans who are questioning the morality of the decisions of those women, almost 3/4 of women who are having abortions. And we also know that we have a justification framework because both quote unquote sides of the debate, the pro-choice and the pro-life, are using this justification language. So pro-choice arguments seek to justify, they seek to give reasons why women should be able to have abortions. And pro-life arguments seek to limit or eliminate what are acceptable justifications. So there's this framework around which people are thinking and talking and arguing in our legislatures about what are justifiable reasons for abortion. So fundamentally, the justification framework holds that abortion is morally wrong. Why? Because two reasons that I talk about. One is that there is a predominant belief that women have a moral obligation to bear children. And that's deeply rooted in Christian theology and tradition. And I talk about that at great length in the book. And second, beliefs about the moral status of what I call the prenate. And one of the things that I'm doing in the book is trying to give us new language, new and different language that tries to move away from the emotionally laden language of the debate. So I don't think it's helpful to talk about fetus. I don't know any pregnant woman who refers to her prenate as a fetus, whether it's a wanted or an unwanted pregnancy. And I also don't think that the language of unborn child is helpful. So I think that the language that we have is bankrupt. And I think that we need better ways of talking about what's happening that reflect the ways in which pregnant women are thinking about the decision that they are facing. And so prenate, I spent a long time trying to come up with a term. And prenate just seemed to work. I mean, we have prenatal vitamins and prenatal health care, and it's something that sort of people are familiar with. That sort of makes sense if you think about it intuitively. I had one interviewer who said, or maybe it was someone who wrote, I can't remember, but she said, you know, it was really awkward at the beginning of the book, but by the end, I was just there. It was so easy. It worked really well. But that's a huge piece. These two assumptions that are being made that undergird this idea that abortion is morally wrong. You know, another way that this justification framework is problematic is that it's really asking the wrong moral question. The moral question that it asks is abortion right or wrong? Well, pregnant women aren't asking that question. Pregnant women who have unwanted, unplanned, or problem pregnancies are asking, what should I do in this situation? That's a very real moral question that women are having to answer. The only one answering the question of, is abortion morally right or wrong, are people somewhere else, right? Not in that space where that woman is asking and struggling and trying to figure out what to do in that situation. So the justification framework, I argue, it's just completely flawed, and it distorts our public discourse, and it prevents us from actually having better moral conversations about why are 50% of pregnancies in this country unplanned. That doesn't mean those 50% are unwanted. 60% become wanted pregnancies, but 40% end in abortion. And if you look at I could show you some charts, the incidence of abortion is decreasing, but it's decreasing because the incidence of pregnancy is decreasing, right? The rate of abortion is still 40% of unplanned pregnancies. So if we want to lower the rates of abortion, then we need to lower the rates of unplanned pregnancy. All right, so this is the justification framework that I spend a lot of time unpacking and critiquing. And a friend of mine was I didn't know she was teaching my book, but she put this on my Facebook yesterday. And she said, I heard in class today, I think I've been working out of a justification framework for abortion my whole life. And that's kind of the point. We all are, but we haven't really named it. And I think it's really helpful to name it so that we know what we need to do to have a different conversation and how to frame a different conversation. So I talked a bit about this. I'm gonna move on to my other points. But I think that in reframing the debate, we need to move from justification to justice. I talked about we need some new language. We need some new moral theory that helps us talk about the moral status of the prenate in better ways than we have right now. And reproductive justice framework centers women and families, which is where I think we do better if we talk from that central place. So the reproductive justice frame has three commitments, three principles, and the first one is the right not to have a child. The second one is the right to have a child. And the third one is the right to parent in safe and healthy environments. And this framework of reproductive justice was created by a group of 12 African American women in 1994. They were the only Black women at a big conference in the middle of the Clinton healthcare work. And they came together and they strategized and talked about how the rights language wasn't working for them. It wasn't helping in their communities. It wasn't addressing the issues that they needed to have addressed related to their reproductive lives. And so they came up with bringing together reproductive rights and social justice and coming up with reproductive justice. So in my work, I talk about reproductive justice as a Christian counter-narrative, and that it recenters the moral question, recognizes that abortion can be a moral good, and it offers us a new way to think about public policy. So I think my time is up, so I could talk for a long time, but that is the three major points that I wanted to highlight.
I think I'm just going to stay seated. So the main points that I wanted the book to accomplish. First, this book is a womanist endeavor. And so I need to unpack womanism for the audience. So here, I'm talking about a Black feminist, a woman of color, who is centering the spirituality and the lived experience of Black life. Womanism as a term was coined by literary author Alice Walker, and her scholarship posits that anytime you're talking from the everyday experiences, not just the leaders of a community, but the everyday woman who is on the street. Womanist scholarship is intentionally anti-oppression. It is concerned with, again, everyday experiences. It is non-ideological. It is communal and spiritual. I craft a woman as sexual ethics from the data that I conducted, these focus groups, these interviews with Black women, as a counter to traditionally white Christian feminist theological ethics, which, to be honest, has excluded the subjectivity of Black women's experience, and as a response to Black feminist cultural theory, which often marginalize and negates Black women's religious selves. Since Christianity was so central to the culture of the Black women who are at the focus of my book, understanding their sexual agency and empowerment required taking seriously their spiritual concerns. My own research of Black women, use of faith-based sexuality ministries, and this is a term that I use to refer to everything from singles conferences to celibacy support groups to religious media targeting singles like eHarmony and Christian Mingle. These groups send messages on a really regular basis. When I was following these groups virtually, I was inundated on a daily basis. I get over 30 different formats of the same message every day: a text message, Instagram post, a Facebook feed, somebody would tweet something that was repeating something else. So it is a totalizing way of framing one's worldview. But I also went to associations, district meetings, churches from varying denominations. I interviewed pastors, and I spent a lot of time online in these virtual communities. For the book, I use womanist ethnography, which centers the studying of Black women as subjects, not objects. I wanted to tell their stories, but with my analysis. In the end, I ended up interviewing 30 women in 13 months, in and outside of the focus groups that I conducted. And their stories reflect my interviews with women aged 18 to 81. And I conducted these interviews in Nashville, Tennessee, Atlanta, Georgia, Chatham, Virginia, which is my small rural community, and Boston, Massachusetts. The import of Black women as subjects telling their own stories is equally important as researching Black women cultural producers of these faith-based sexuality ministries. So to give you sort of the highlights of what my book tries to do, I follow a televangelist, Juanita Bynum, at the time, prophetess Juanita Bynum, who built an empire of faith-based sexuality ministries that provide messages primarily to Black women about faith and sexuality. I am focused on messages that are from Black women to other Black women. Paula White and others have sort of journeyed into the fray, but my study was particular to this subject group. And I found, as I was trying to unpack some of what evangelical conversations were about rhetoric in these ministries, that the focus on agency was really key. And that was surprising to me, because we tend to talk about, we being the public, we being scholars, tend to talk about agency as freedom to do whatever. And here I was involved with women who were talking about agency as the freedom to not have sex, the freedom to choose with whom to have sex and with under what conditions and what encounters. And so this was a different notion of agency that I wanted to highlight. And so I think that's one of the gifts that the book offers. In the third chapter of the book, I pick up two particular, I look at four, but I'm going to highlight two for us today, particular faith-based ministries, the Wives in Waiting group and the Pinky Promise movement. I spent 3 years in the field with these virtual groups, following their blogs, responding to their podcasts, their YouTube, their Instagram, their social media feeds. And I examined these groups as women were drawn to participate in them, ultimately positing that the women who did participate were not uncritical consumers. They didn't go in as cultural dupes who didn't have a say. They picked and chose what made sense to them for their worldview and for their lives, but it often oriented their day-to-day realities. The second half of the book, and what I think the other major contribution of the book is me trying to reframe some of the messages, offering an alternative, because part of the conversation was, we're not having these conversations anywhere else. That's what these groups offer. They offer a space to talk about faith. They offer a space to talk about sexual desire, sexual experience. that I don't get in my religious community. And I felt these ultimately weren't the best messages as a feminist, as a womanist. And so I wanted to offer an alternative. And so that's what the second half of the book does. So in chapter 4, I look at same-sex desire, because I was kind of stunned when I started participating in these groups that there were constant conversations about going after Steve and not Lori. The adage, it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. So their refrain was, go after Steve, not Lori. And I didn't quite understand why, because these were heterosexual celibacy groups where women were saving themselves to heterosexual marriage. And then I began to note the great number of women who, and these are confessional groups, so you can't lurk. Part of the purpose of admission is that you confess, because you confess so that the group can hold you accountable. So it isn't just you're bearing your soul so people can talk about you. You are bearing your soul so people can pray for you. And so people can uplift you and they can sustain you with whatever it is you're struggling with. And so there were all these confessions about same-sex desire that I didn't understand. And so chapter 4 tries to offer a response to women who are participating in these movements who won't consider themselves ex-gay. They use the phrase that they are lesbians who are living by Christ's rule, or they are women who experience same-sex desire but know it's not God's best. So they don't believe that they're going to outgrow it. They do believe that they'll participate in a heterosexual marriage, that is God's best for them, because God created them as they are, and they are created with same-sex desire, but God also gifted them with free will. And so they are to use their free will to not engage in same-sex desire. Chapter 5 looked at senior sexuality. So again, another anomaly. I was going to these sessions, I was going in the virtual chat rooms, and I kept seeing women over the age of 50 popping up. And I didn't understand why. Largely, part of the import was women live and participate in these movements for decades, because Black women tend to marry over the age of 50. So if you started as a teen, that's a lot of time in these movements. And so I wanted to study and understand that group. And then finally, I looked at sexual pleasure. And what does it mean to be a woman of faith and experience sexual pleasure? So I've given you an overview of the book. I want to end with why this topic is important and matters for this moment. First, it's significant to talk about Black women having a moral right to sexual agency. Given the long history of controlled sexuality, tracking how Black women are engaged as sexual beings is necessary. My inclusion of celibacy as sexual agency is also critical, because celibacy is a hard-fought right for Black women because of the intense amount of sexual violence that we have experienced. The next import of the work is to push towards sexual agency, to start with owning up to your responsibility to make sexual decisions and being willing to accept the consequences of those choices. So how do we motivate a next generation to live with the sexual choices they make? How do we equip them to make better sexual decisions, more informed sexual decisions? Finally, I think the work offers that celibacy as a part of sexual agency doesn't stop there. You don't stop being an agent once you're married. That agency, the ownership that you have in your own body, continues when you're partnered. And so to increase conversations around what it means to take ownership of one's body, I think is one of the gifts of the book.
Wow, I wish we had a lot more time, because there's so much I want to, would love for you to unpack. But what I'm hearing both of you talk about is this moral obligation placed upon women to procreate. And so, Monique, as you're talking about in Passionate and Pious, the idea of sexual pleasure is often not something spoken about for many women, but especially not Black women, because of the racialization that's happened with Black women's sexuality. And then, Toddy, as you were talking about that moral obligation to be a mother, I was thinking of Heather Heyer, who was killed last year in Charlottesville, and there were some, I was going to say white nationalists, but what's the term? White supremacists, I kind of intertwine them, but there were white supremacists who said that she didn't have any value because she was a 30-something-year-old woman who had not had any children. And so part of the issues around shame that happen for many women is not only with the issue of whether someone has had an abortion or not, but it's also if people have infertility challenges, because the expectation, the moral obligation is to become a mother, and not for sexual pleasure, but to bear children. And really appreciate the kind of languaging and framing you're both bringing to these issues. We had them come because there's an intersection with these issues in some really profound ways. So, given the results of the recent midterm elections and the heavy conservative sway of the Supreme Court, and there might be yet another move within the Supreme Court soon, we don't even know. What critical action do you recommend as we're listening to you? What action do you recommend at grassroots levels to enhance the public narrative about women as moral agents? And what difference can people of faith make within their own communities and the public square now? Monique?
Sure. So this is where I go off script and I say the thing that I get to say when I get to go off script. So look around the room. This is a room full of white women. Acknowledge that. Take that in. When we're asking what grassroots movements can happen after the midterm election, that's what happens. White women activate for justice. And I say this seriously and significantly, not as an accusation, but as fact. If we trust the polling data that says we trust women, but maybe not when they're running for office, or we trust women, but maybe when legislation would have them choose actions we don't want. So I don't start with the grassroots. I start with where we are in the room, taking space of that. I also think that one of the lessons that I learned, or I learned 3 lessons from following these movements, these evangelical conservative groups. They do 3 things really well: accountability, accessibility, and applicability. That's what happens after you activate. So once you decide that me and my girlfriends, my sisters, my cousins are gonna have conversations, not just about politics, not just about the Supreme Court, but about what it means to be a fully embodied human, then you do the work. That's the next step. For me, people of faith can and should be open and active in our support for those who actually are trusting women. Often there's a void of aftercare when people take courageous stances. We sort of leave them out there and go, wasn't that bold and stupid? Can you believe it? They had the nerve to say that out loud. That community has to live. That person has to live within their community. And we as people of faith have to be in support of that justice move. We have to be accessible to that in a variety of ways. If you look at the Congressional Prayer Caucus, part of what it did in its Blitz handbook was say to all of the states, this is how we take our country back. They weren't ashamed about it. They were very clear about it. It's on the freaking website. So it's not hidden information. They want you to go take up this mantle. Progressives, we wait to get activated, and then we wait to get angry, and then we wait to take action. And it's often too late. So that is the second real step. And then third, this sense of applicability. So why should I ask a room full of white women, predominantly white women, to care about sexual agency, and particularly sexual agency of Black women? Well, first, why shouldn't you care? You're committed to the project of feminism by your presence in this space. So that means you care for all women. Two, sexual agency of marginalized community members is the canary in the mine. If you look at Black women, women of color, sexual rights, it illuminates ways forward for more privileged women. And finally, as women of faith, we must uphold the morality of sexual agency for every person. If we believe in a God that manifests in us, we must also care about moral agency. To deny this agency or privilege it for only a few, I think actually diminishes the God we claim to worship. So to wrap up to the end, I want you to be the grassroots movement, to leave this conversation animated, even irritated at my comments, at my accusation even though it wasn't. To go back and say, what small step can I take? What conversation with Nana can I have? Can I talk to my neighbor about what we're gonna do post this midterm? Because that's the next step for justice, for me.
So thanks for that question. I think the midterms are probably on a lot of our minds, as well as the Supreme Court with, God bless, Ruth Bader Ginsburg right now. You know, the left has, the right has been playing a long game in terms of shaping the conversation, in terms of moving to get more conservative justices appointed. They, like you said, they have these handbooks that are very public. There are very organized groups of very conservative, traditionalist, Republican, Christian women who are writing sample legislation that is then being sent out to all the states and is then moving through our state houses. They are very, very organized. And as we think about sort of what do these midterms mean, what's going to happen over the next 5, 10, 15 years with the court, that's important. We need to strategize. We need to move on the political level. But we also need to be prepared for what will happen if Roe falls. And we need to be prepared for what we are going to do for the women who are most at risk, which is probably not the women in this room. The women who are most at risk are poor women and young women and women of color. And we need to be thinking very strategically about what we are going to do, what we are prepared to do, what are the possibilities for making sure that all women are able to have control over their reproductive lives, over their decisions about family, children, and I think that is it's just a real challenge for many of us who have thought that it was sort of out of the realm that that abortion might become illegal. And it will revert back to the states, so it will still be legal in some places, but the places where it will be illegal are also the places where there are the largest rates of poverty. And so that is going to be very real. And I think that we just need to be prepared for that. I mean, certainly, again, we need to be organizing and electing good folk to the national and state legislatures, but we also need to be thinking about, what the strategy will be and what we're going to do to make sure that we're thinking about the most marginalized. But I also want to talk about what I think is a major part of that, which is changing the conversation. And I think that for the long term, for our long-term strategy, we absolutely have to change the conversation. We have to change the way people are talking about this issue in our country and around the world. And so I talk about it as we need to flip the script. We need a new narrative. We need to change. The first thing I talk about is that we just need to reject justification and preach justice. And anytime someone tries to have a conversation with you where they're using that justification framework, just don't engage. Don't respond in kind. Change the conversation and talk about something else. Find ways to flip that script. Because the script itself is preventing us from talking about some of the most important things we could be doing with our public policy to actually help women who have children that they are struggling to raise. And so much of our time and energy and effort and money is being spent on making sure babies are being born and not taking care of the babies that are already born. And so find ways to change the conversation. Second, focus on women and families. And this is, again, why I think the RJ frame is so helpful, because it has the three principles. It has, the first is the right not to have a child. But the other two are just as important. The right to have a child. There are all sorts of reasons and barriers and challenges that women face who want to have children, and that is just as much a piece of reproductive justice as the right to not have children. And so thinking about what that means in terms of healthcare coverage, what that means in terms of the history of sterilization abuse in this country, and the ways in which women of color have their very bodies have been used as tools for experimentation. And then, the third pillar is the right to raise children in healthy and safe environments. And if we are people who are committed to healthy families, we need to take seriously the communities that people are raising their families in and the safety of those communities, and particularly for children of color and their parents who are struggling with issues of safety. And so I think that focusing on women and families and putting the needs of women and families first as we talk and think about what does reproductive justice mean, and making sure that we say reproductive justice also means raising those children. It doesn't just mean giving birth to children. Third, speak publicly and often with your people that you know, your family members, your friends, but write op-eds. Get out of just your friend group or your family group. Write letters to the editor. Write blog posts. Use your social media. Because this is my last point. We have, we need as pro-choice people of faith to speak out more publicly and to make sure that people are recognizing that there are pro-choice people of faith and what that means, and to tell people what that means to you. I think that one of the fallouts of the culture wars is that we've created this binary that is between the evangelical Christians who represent religious voices, and then the secular left that represent progressive voices. And that has just erased a whole lot of people from the conversation. And we need to find ways of speaking publicly and often, and doing that as people of faith, and finding our voice to say that evangelical Christianity doesn't define religion in this country. Christianity or all the many other ways in which people live out their faiths. So yeah, that's it.
Two comments I want to make as I reflect on what you've shared. In 1935, my mother's mother died as she was seeking to have what then was an illegal abortion. And that impacted the entire family system when she died. Colorado RCRC on the table over here has cards of the stories of women who died because legal, affordable abortions were not available to them. Those women had value. Women do not only have value when they bear children. And that's something that I think, by and large, our society really struggles with. Women have value in their personhood as made by our God. And I hope you will go over to the table when we finish and look at the cards there. They're powerful stories. And I really appreciate that both Monique and Todd have brought stories, they've woven them into their books, because often we engage these things only from our heads or only what we've heard in our religious traditions, but this is very much about people's real lives, all aspects of reproductive justice. And so I hope you will look at those. And the last thing I want to say, as a Black woman in America who comes from a people whose bodies were controlled, it does not sit well with me for others to say they have the right to control a woman's body and to deny her as she is making the choices in conversation with her own understanding of God. That's beyond everybody's pay grade to make a decision for someone else. And so I thank you for hearing these. I love you too more and more every time I hear you speak. We're going to open for about 15 minutes of questions and answers. I think we have some mics about to be passed around, made available to you. So if anyone has questions,